All right. Well, welcome. It is 12:30. Thank you for spending your lunch hour with us. I'm gonna let all the otters take notes. I wonder if there's like any data out about these AI note takers on Zoom calls, like how many people actually go back and look at those notes from those calls. I'm gonna say 5%. That's my guess. So, Albert, how was your weekend? How was your week?
Oh man, Father's Day was great. Had all of our kids in one house, which was pretty awesome. Since our kids are kind of grown up now, so that was really good. But week was good. Looked at a fourplex on Saturday, so following up, I put in a verbal offer with them on Saturday, and follow up with them tomorrow. Our new build construction is probably we got set back about 5 days last week with all the rain, but our
Yeah.
builder's gonna have some trades in there towards the end here, just kind of on top of each other, just to try to make up some of that time. But everything's going good, man. It was a pretty good week.
Good, good. You're learning a lot with the new construction right now.
Oh man, learning a lot. Kind of really learning like I really want to do it more. So really kind of focusing on looking at vacant land, like in infill lots, in the city, in certain zip codes. And so we have a duplex that we're going to start building here, maybe in a couple months. We're working with the architect now, but so that'll be a little bit different than what we're building now. And it's in a X500 flood zone, so it'll be elevated about 5 feet
Hmm.
off the ground. So that'll be interesting to see what that looks like, what the plans come back and look like.
Do you ever see yourself down the road building because you're building like small communities or private communities or single family developments?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would be like developing. I'd be more just coming in after like the development part has been done, like all of the utilities, the roads and all that
Hmm.
stuff. I don't think I'd want to do that. But coming in, like what we're doing right now has just been a very positive experience. We have an experienced builder, and I think that has a lot to do with it. So, but I like it so far. It's way better than rehabbing houses. I'll still rehab a house, but it's just way better than rehabbing houses.
I really want to get into developing and building because we have a lot of clients and connections with developers. They go horizontal, and then you're like the builder, you go vertical. So build the sticks and the bricks, but we do have guys that can do the infrastructure, the streets, the utilities, drainage,
Yeah.
things like that. So yeah, so we're gonna be talking about scaling. How do you grow a business? And I think for a lot of people on this call that jump on this call, you know, the hardest one to get started is that first deal. It's just it's the traction. It's just pulling the trigger, taking initiative and just getting that one deal going. And you're gonna learn quite a bit. But today, what we're going to talk about is once you have that first deal on paper in the portfolio, how do you scale from one to two, three, 10, even more? And we looked at a portfolio about 2 or 3 months ago that was about 480 completely different units. It was combination of single family, vacant land. It was all sorts of random stuff. So
Wow.
somebody had the time and the energy and the process of the system at some point in history to acquire all that property. So so we're going to talk about that today. So Albert, perfect co-host for this. What are some things you've learned along the way, just doing deal after deal, and what are some of the ways, like how do you keep your focus and your mindset? Because to me that seems overwhelming to have
Yeah.
even one deal is overwhelming. You're managing multiple at the same time.
Yeah. So I mean, we've done about 25 deals in the last 4 years, 4.5 years. And it's everything from buy and hold, flipping, wholesaling, new construction now. And it's primarily me that runs the business. My wife handles like the design part of it when we get to that part on the renovations and construction. But I handle sourcing the deals,
Hmm.
financing them, managing contractors, all of the accounting, all of the paperwork. I managed all the title information, all of the documentation, all of that, I do manage it, and it can definitely be overwhelming, and you can get lost in the weeds. Like that's what you don't want to do, is just kind of get lost in a lot of these details, because it can take you away from like these higher return tasks like deal sourcing, right? Or networking. Like people
Hmm.
just kind of sleep on the power of networking, but you
Hmm.
can't go to these networking events if you're constantly putting out fires, right? At your properties. If you don't have the proper people, if you don't have the proper systems in place, or if you didn't take care of things in the beginning of your project. So there's a lot of planning that gets involved with this. And I think that's kind of important for new people to understand is number one, get your first deal, right? Because you're, like you
Hmm.
said, you're going to learn so much on that very first deal. Get that very first one under your belt. So what if you don't have an LLC? So what if
Right.
you're tracking everything on a spreadsheet? All right.
Hmm.
But just get that first deal. You start to learn, where can I put some systems in place? And that's kind of what we learned from our coach in the beginning was, hey, look, here's a spreadsheet. Just track your expenses.
Yeah.
He didn't get in the weeds of saying go hire a CPA and do it, do a cost segregation, like get all that stuff, right? Just start with the basics. Just track your
Hmm.
expenses.
Right.
Because then when you start to systematize this out, you can go back to that historical information. And now it's like, okay, cool. I'm glad I tracked all this stuff. But for me, that's kind of what I did from the very beginning was like our first property we got, our first rental buy and hold, it's in my personal name. Like we refinanced it into our personal name because we didn't even have an
Hmm.
LLC set up at the time. And then everything after that, we put into an LLC. So don't get bogged down or think that you have to figure out everything from the first
Right.
property. You're going to
Right.
figure this out as you go. And that's how we've
Yeah.
been able to scale was we'll talk about this, right? Is putting your people in place, your processes in place, and just doing a little bit of pre-planning in the beginning.
Yeah. People, processes, planning. So those are Albert's three P's of real estate investing.
Yeah.
So, going back to your first deal, what were a couple of the surprises, or what were the maybe I should ask, what were a couple of the points in that process where you're like, nah, I can't keep doing this? Did you ever have a moment where you're like, this is not for me, or this is like,
No, I never had the moment of it's not for me just because, when we got started, this was in the middle of COVID, had just started in 2020. So people were worried, and we were worried, probably not necessarily justifiable, but we were just worried, kind of like everybody else. And when I went into thinking about real estate and researching it and hiring our coach, I never thought to myself, what if this doesn't work out? I just did not have that mindset. My
mhm,
mindset was this has to work. Like this is our very first investment where we're taking tens of thousands of dollars and putting it into a tangible asset that could burn down, that I could
mhm,
get robbed, a contractor could screw me over, right? Or I could get sued, right? When you're investing in the stock market, you go put it in
right,
this company and like who cares? It's just gonna
yeah,
go do its thing. So it was scary, but like I mentioned before, there wasn't really anything that scared me like that. Like, this isn't for me. We started with a coach who had a plan. A lot of people don't have a coach, right? They're
got it.
learning off YouTube University, which is fine, right? I would just say I'm a copious note taker as well,
Hmm.
and I read slow as well.
Yeah.
So all of those things kind of work in my favor when I'm trying to, when I was looking at this first deal. I wasn't over analyzing it, but I just took like I saved my notes. Like I've got stacks of notes here at my desk. These are from 2 years ago. Just so
Okay.
I can go like and refer back to them. You're thinking, why are you still writing in notebooks? Because I'm just really old school and I just like referring back to that stuff. It's easy for me to find. But in the beginning, having a spreadsheet, tracking all of your expenses, asking a lot of questions, getting with the right mentor or coach or partner with someone, that
That's
knows what they're
that's
doing.
general, like, good advice in business in general. Like one of the things I always tell people, like if you're starting any type of business, whether it be real estate investing, and by the way, your processes and the systems that you've designed for flipping a single family house is different from holding a short-term rental. That's going to be a different process compared to developing or building, right? Those are all completely different processes. My suggestion to anybody, because we got guys that are buying RV parks, we have guys that are building RV parks. Like those are two different things. Buying an RV park and building an RV park, two different things. One of the best ways you can add a tremendous amount of value to your business venture right off the bat is documenting the process, coming up with a documented process and then making improvements on it, whether it be, you know, how to, how to maintain a septic system, who to call, or how to cut the grass, who to call,
Mhm.
just having a way to document that in such a way that you could just like like McDonald's or Chick-fil-A, just take a franchise manual and hand it off to
Yeah,
someone.
yeah.
You work with a lot of investors. You and I both. We work with a lot of investors that are seasoned. They do a lot of these deals, but we also have those guys. They do one and they're done. What do you think keeps a lot of these guys from going the next level and getting that second or third investment property?
My honest opinion is I think it's grit. You know, I think that's what holds a lot of people back is I think if someone can get accustomed to being uncomfortable and doing hard things,
Hmm.
when they face adversity or they face a problem in their real estate investing journey or starting a business, they don't
Yeah.
just stop. They don't just like quit, you know. The thing about quitting is once you do it, you start to do more of it. You know, it
Hmm.
becomes a habit, right?
Quitting
So
becomes a habit.
quitting becomes a habit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's what keeps a lot of people, you know, maybe didn't go as planned. And most people's first investment property doesn't go as planned, you
Right.
know, but it's, you plan for contingencies, right? You have your reserves and you have to just build up this belief in yourself that, you know, I can do this. I think it all boils down back to, like, we didn't talk about this, but like, what's your why? Why are you even doing it? You know, if you're
Yeah.
doing it for money, then yeah, you're probably not, you know, the first time you face adversity, you're probably going to quit, right? But if you're
Right.
doing it for something bigger than that, whether it's family or financial freedom, you know, or building generational wealth, whatever it is, and like having daily reminders of that every single day, or maybe you have a crappy job that you want to get out of
Yeah.
eventually, you know, you just want to work at that job for the next 40 or 50 years, and then hopefully you have enough retirement saved up, you know,
Right.
having that as a daily reminder, that builds that grit when you face a
Boom.
problem, you're just going to keep going, you
I
know?
love it. Grit, huge one. So that goes back to mindset. It goes back
Hmm.
to knowing our big why, understanding our purpose, and then keeping things in context of the big picture is what I hear you saying. So
Yeah.
even little deals can really derail somebody, especially those of us that have the tendency to get discouraged. There's going to be ups and downs. I've seen you. I've seen your success, bro. You are one of the most successful real estate investors I know, but I have seen you also not succeed before, and I love it because you just keep going. Um, so did you have tell us a little bit about how you started building up because you've done this in such a relatively short amount of time.
Yeah.
Like how did you like when you did your first property? You bought it, you closed on it. Did you sell it? Did
Yeah.
you hold on to it, or did you start on your second property while you were in process, or did you
Yeah.
wait? Did you give yourself
Yeah.
6 months of a break, or
No, no, I'm telling you, man. Like we just, you know, it was like there was a 10-foot pool. You know, I had some floaties on, and I just dove in. Like that. That's what I just compare it to. I just my floaties were my coach, like that, and my support system. The team that I was already provided. You know, those were my floaties, but I still had to figure out how to swim. So we got like in 2020, we got two properties under contract. We closed on two properties, our very first two, 2 weeks apart in October of 2020. And our first deal was a full gut rehab. I'm talking foundation, roof, electrical, plumbing, window, siding, like everything. We reconfigured everything. We added a bathroom. We converted the attic to back to like a place for HVAC. We built a garage in the backyard. That was our very first deal. You know, like it wasn't some 20, $30,000 cosmetic, you know, rehab. And so, but having a team in place already that supported us, that I knew I can lean on, having my coach and mentor
Mhm.
or partner, if you want to partner with someone that you can lean on, that's someone that's been
Yeah,
there before, it builds that confidence, And then the second property that we had them under contract at the same time. We closed on both of them in October. The second one we kept as a rental that we still own to this day, and it was a pretty big rehab too. But we
Right.
just, and then after that, like we sold that first property in March of 2021, about 6 months after, 5 or 6 months after we closed on the purchase, we closed on the sale. We refinanced the rental property in May, and we
Hmm.
had our third property under contract. We closed on it in March also of 2021. And that was
Wow.
our third property, which ended up being a really big flip in Texas City, dealing with permit issues. We didn't get red tag, but the permit process, again, mid COVID, everything, they didn't want to let people in their offices. Everything was a lot slower, blah, 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 whatever. So we got that under contract in March of 2021. We ended up taking 6 months to rehab that. We sold that in September 2021. But in July and August of 2021, we got our first Airbnb property as a complete gut as well. The house was literally leaning over about 7 inches.
Hmm.
We probably should have just torn it down, but we didn't. But we kept it, and we still have that as an Airbnb in Galveston. And then October of 2021, we got two properties under contract at the same time. They're right next to each other. How do you do this, right? That was your question. Like, how do I
Right.
do all this? Like, one, two, three. The first two were off market. The next three were on the MLS.
Wow.
And then the fourth one was off market. One of those ones where I told you it was side by side houses. We went to go look at the property that was on the MLS, and right next door was a house that looked very identical, but it had high grass. I mean, grass was maybe 4 feet high. And then I'm
Mm-mm-mm.
like, okay, I peeked in the window. Nobody lived there. It looked vacant, and I skip traced it. And I
Hmm.
don't like you doing cold calls, Austin, but I cold called the owner. And again, this is in Galveston, highly competitive. I think just that day he was ready to sell. I cold called him and got that property under contract, and we closed on those on the exact same day, right next to each other. We still own them both next to each other in Galveston. Man, what's that, like 5 or 6 deals in about the first year? And we've
Wow.
averaged about 5 deals a year. I will tell people that are new that you want to get into real estate, or maybe you got your first deal, make sure people in your social network know what you're doing.
Right.
Because out of those 20 deals, 25 deals, I think maybe nine of them are referrals, you know? And let me put it in perspective for you. Out of those referrals, we've added probably over $150,000 to our net worth. And that's
Mm-mm.
just by somebody just sharing something with you. It's so simple. We pay for those referrals. We're paying $1,000 for a referral, but someone just knows someone that wants to sell a property. And now you build this reputation. You deal with people honestly, compassionately, you understand them
Yeah.
empathetically, because most of these people are in some tough situation, right? And so they're just bringing you deals. And there's just so much power in social media if you use it the right way, but you just got to let people know what you're
So this
doing.
goes back to your whole lead gen. Back up just a second. So how long did you lead gen? Like how many months or years did you put
So we
into creating those
started,
contacts?
I was literally like writing letters, like sending out letters for probably 3 months just to people in pre-foreclosure. Like I was printing
Hmm.
them out, hand signing them because I wanted it to look, legit. I was hand writing the addresses on the envelopes. I think we got two of our properties through just direct mail like that, just me sending out letters. And then we got another two properties by sending out cold texts. But I was doing that for about maybe 3 years, and I think we probably got about four properties from it. I used some bigger like postcard houses that would send out postcards,
Yeah.
thousands of them, but I never got any results. I got more results on cold texting and cold calling, and then handwritten envelopes and sending out letters that way. And then again, referrals, MLS. We bought a few properties off wholesalers too.
Very awesome.
So
So let's go into tracking numbers. So
yeah.
what numbers are we tracking? What is something that in order as we scale and build our portfolio, what are the critical numbers that we need to be tracking on each of our properties?
I
And how
think
does
if
that
you're
look
gonna
like when you have more than one property?
Yeah, I think if like as far as tracking numbers or metrics, like we can talk about metrics and we can talk about expenses. We kind of talked about expenses already, But when you're tracking metrics, if you really want to understand like what's working and what's not working, I have a spreadsheet that I put all of my cold calls and cold text information into. And that means
Okay.
it's the address, what date I call, some of the numbers come back as, invalid or whatever. So I track all that too. But I used to do that with the letters and now I just do it with texting. So I do track that. I think that's important, but I think it's more important like if you hire a VA to help you. If you hire a
Hmm.
VA to help you do cold calls, for instance, then you want to see how much does it really cost per lead that I get, right? Or per property or a closed lead. You can go that far as well. Because if you let's say you're paying $2,500 a month to have like a
Yeah.
VA do cold calling for you, and it takes you 5 months to get one deal, right? That's pretty easy to figure out, what's
Right.
my cost per deal, right? Five
Hmm.
times $2,500. Like that's how much it cost me to get that deal. Hopefully it's not that much, but you know what I mean? You can also then backtrack that as well. Like how many calls did they make? Okay. All right.
Okay.
Out of
Yeah.
all those calls, I got this one appointment, you know. To keep it small numbers,
So
maybe
you're
maybe
tracking
it's like
conversion
100
rates.
calls gets you like five appointments. And we
Okay.
talked about this last time, I think. And then those
Mhm.
five appointments, you can get one offer,
Okay.
accepted. So then you just work, okay, if I want to do 5 deals a month or two deals a month, then you just double all those metrics. Does that make sense?
So you're con you're tracking your contacts, your appointments set, and the deals
Hmm.
closed. So that's the lead gen side, or we may call that the economic model side of things. But once you kind of have those numbers figured out, um, that also includes, which is important, is the conversion ratio. So you said
Hmm.
105, 5 to 1.
Yeah.
That's probably a good rule of thumb in a lot of areas.
Yeah.
What about when you're rehabbing a property? Talk to me about that. And then what happened, how do you
Yeah.
financially, like, what do you track
Yeah.
financially?
So what I'll do is I keep it simple because I like to see things. I don't like to have to click around in a lot of places. We do use QuickBooks, but I don't like to have to click around in too many places to just look at one number. So I keep like a spreadsheet of all of my numbers, and then that I also keep my QuickBooks that goes to our CPA. Okay.
Hmm.
But when I start a project, I just basically start a new tab because I have a tab for every property and I put my budget. Like here's my budget, and this is the budget that was I approved with the contractor. Let's say it's 150,000. I'll put that at the top. And then basically like I've got his quote and I'll put down all of his expenses and then when I pay them. So out of all of his expenses, I can keep track of what's been done, what's been paid, and then I've got a running total at the bottom that then tells me how much budget do I have left. You know,
Right.
I'll also like highlight changes. So those are things that are going to be outside the budget. That I plan through contingency. All right. So I'll highlight those just yellow. Hey, this wasn't part of the original scope of work. This was an extra $500. They did some sheetrock repair, blah, 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 whatever. Right. So I'll keep a column with just my contractor, and that's all of them. So it could be tree trimming, it could be landscaping, it could be a fence builder or whatever. I'll track all that. And then the main portion of my expenses are going to be like my holding costs.
Okay.
My interest paid to my lenders. You got to pay your electrical bill, your water bill. You got to get the lawn mowed. Some of those things people forget about. And it's easy to forget about those because they are very small expenses. But let's say you have a really big job and it's like 9 months, then that's 9 months times those expenses per month, right? That could be
Hmm.
$1,000, 2,000, $3,000. It can really add up and become significant. But I just make a ballpark estimate of what that's going to be, based off the length of the project. So I'll probably give myself about 250 to $300 per month in like just utilities and lawn care and stuff like that. And then it's easy for me to know what I'm paying in interest per month because whatever loan terms that I have, I'm like, okay, cool. If my interest payment is 5 grand a month or my accrued interest is 5 grand a month, this is going to take 12 months. At the end of the day, if I'm going to flip this, I plug that $60,000, which is the accrued interest, I plug that in there as an expense. When I'm going to sell this, if I'm going to sell it for 500,000, minus 6% for realtor fees, minus 1.5% for title fees, and then
Hmm.
I'll add my loan payoff, and then my interest from that. And that'll give me just kind of like this gross like profit, you know.
And how often are you looking at that? Like, is that in your calendar?
My spreadsheet, yes, every Monday I'm in looking at accounting stuff. That's my goal is every Monday to get in, categorize expenses, I have all of my credit cards. You know what's interesting? Off topic here though, but my business credit cards for some reason don't have don't give me the option to auto pay. And I think that's just kind of weird. My
Oh yeah,
consumer
because they
cards,
want you. They having some tech issues, but we'll continue. So you were saying that the cards aren't having aren't letting you do auto pay. You're on mute.
oh, there we go. Yeah, I just think that's kind of weird, you know. So, but anyway,
It's
yeah, I didn't want to get too far off topic, but
that's how they make money though. It's by you
I've
missing a
missed a
payment.
payment. Like I've actually missed a payment on one of my business cards. And like I was like maybe 5 days past due, and they moved the card balance to my personal credit. So it just showed up there. It didn't show as a missed payment, but now the credit card shows up on my personal credit. It's like, okay. So I paid it off. But anyway, thought that was interesting. Didn't mean to get us too far off track.
No, that's important. You got to watch out for that. So
Yeah.
systemizing your portfolio. Let's talk about tools and people because you call people processes and planning the pre.
Mhm.
So let's start with people first. So in order for you to scale, not having these people would make this impossible. Go.
As far as real estate's concerned, if you're buying and holding, you have to have a good handyman, unless you plan to
Hmm.
be the handyman yourself. Like a
Hmm.
handyman that can help and get you out of a bind and something happens. But we can go back to pre-planning. So the part of the pre-plan is I'm going to renovate this property completely. I'm going to replace everything that could potentially break while I own the property or while anybody owns the property. Like I'm replacing HVAC, roof, I'm fixing the foundation, making sure electrical, plumbing, everything is good to go. So when we put this rental in operation, then in service, then I don't have to worry about a leaky pipe, right? I don't have to worry
Yeah.
about a leaky roof. All those things we take care of all those big maintenance things up front. But having a handyman, like especially for our vacation rentals, because guests are constantly in and out of the property, so they get, more wear and tear than someone that's
Hmm.
just living there every day. We have things break off. I've got, curtains falling off the wall or something like that. Having the right person in there. I had a slow leak behind a refrigerator where the water line is, and it caused a mold issue. I'm not a
Yeah.
good sheetrock person, but I had a handyman in Galveston that I called. He was there the next day.
Do you have a
So
good idea, like per year, how much you need to set aside for expenses like that?
we set aside, like theoretically, we set aside about 5% for all of our properties. Now,
Okay.
and that's because, again, like I mentioned, that number might be higher if you're not fixing things up front. You may be at 5 or 10%. Yeah, I'm sorry, you may be at 10 or 15% per month of your income coming in for maintenance if you didn't fix that roof, right?
Right.
Or you've got electrical problems that you just band-aided while you were there.
Do you
So
have like a separate budget for each property, or is it just for everything together?
So right now it's for everything together. I don't necessarily set aside a budget. Like I'm telling you, like how the types of I think for a year, for like average for the year, maintenance and repairs is less than $500.
Okay.
Yeah, less than $500. I mean,
That
and that is
that's average
really
on.
low. That's really low. Um, some people have thousands of dollars of repairs. Now,
Right.
we'll, we'll replace a roof that Windstorm said we needed to replace, and that's kind of out of the blue. So then
Hmm.
we dip into reserves. So we do have reserves that are in just the big bucket, and we don't have them necessarily
Okay.
for each property where we can cover those things if we need to.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of these dilapidated properties that we walk a lot of times are just investors that don't have those reserves and they
Yeah,
just don't have the money to put back in the property.
yeah.
And that's how we're able to find those good deals.
So that's
So
having
you
people, right? Having your contractors, that are
contractors,
reliable. your contractors that are reliable, and sometimes they can help you too to do minor repairs and things like that. If your handyman is not available, or let's say you want to refresh your property, you can go back to your contractor. It's like, hey, I want to update the flooring or paint or whatever. So that's good to have in your network. And that helps with just systematizing your
Hmm.
process as well.
Yeah. You also mentioned your wife. She plays a key role. Sounds like she does a lot to help you
Key
stay
role,
on.
yeah, definitely on the design side, 100%. Like I'm not good at that. So she's very, very strong. That's her strength, her superpower. She also helps with whenever I'm trying to negotiate on market properties that are on the MLS. So she doesn't necessarily like to make the call, but I just kind of nudge her to
Hmm.
call real estate agents. But she's really, really good at building rapport and negotiating deals for us. Um, she, yeah, that's pretty much her role.
So a
Another,
good agent. So number one
yeah.
contractor. Number two, a good agent.
Yes, but also a good CPA. So once you start to
CPA.
scale, and you have these rental properties that you're holding, then you want to try to figure out how can you leverage the tax advantages of those properties.
Hmm.
And some people they're just not educated on the tax advantages of owning real estate. And that's honestly one of the biggest parts of owning real estate is for the tax advantages you get. So
Yeah.
having a good real estate focused CPA, so if you're talking to CPAs, part of my interview process is how many rental properties do you own? If they
Right.
don't
Right.
own any, it's not a deal breaker, but I'd probably lean more towards a CPA that actually owns real estate because then they kind of understand a little bit more about real estate laws and some of the loopholes that are in there with real estate.
The tax got to understand the tax advantages. I would add people, insurance agents,
Insurance
'cause you need.
agents. Yeah.
It's good to have a quick go to. One thing I don't think a lot of investors think about is a utility concierge.
Mm,
We have a relationship with the concierge, utility concierge, and she is just a call. You can just call her and say, "I need everything set up at this house," and she can just do the rest for you, and it's free. She gets
hmm.
paid by the utility provider, so that's a really interesting person to have on your team. Um, other things is just knowing, building relationships with people in the city, I think is a critical thing. I think there's an advantage to going hyper local with your strategy if you're in a position where you can focus on especially one city and you do multiple properties in the same city and you
Or
can
even
build
one
a
zip
relation.
code. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Just focusing on one, and we've talked about that too. And that's another way to scale is to do the opposite of diversifying, staying hyper focused on a specific niche, and
Yeah.
then you'll end up seeing a lot of the same players over and over
Yeah, I,
again.
I know I know investors they just go wherever the deal is, and for
Yeah,
some and they're doing things at really high volume at really at large scale. Like they'll do two or three flips a month. I mean, and that's just insane to me to wrap my head around that. And they just have a
yeah,
profit margin number they want to hit.
yeah,
They're just
hmm,
like, I just need to make 30K a flip. I don't care, because they're
yeah,
doing them fast, they're just knocking them out, and they'll go all over town.
yeah.
Like for me, if you can focus and be hyper focused, then you can learn that market. So then you can actually be faster to that property because you don't need to do a ton of underwriting. You already know what properties are selling for price per square foot in that particular market. If
Yeah.
you're spread out all over the place, then it can take you longer. And if you're a little bit late to the party, your offer may not be accepted.
So it's interesting that this came up because I was actually going to talk to you about doubling down on a zip code specifically versus going
Hmm.
diverse. Like, so what would you say are some of the pros and cons of going wide, Because I know like you've done like everything from the Heights to Galveston, you've done mainly single
Yeah.
family, but you've also looked at flipping, holding, long-term rentals, short-term rentals.
Yeah. I think for me, like what I learned in the beginning was I wanted to invest where I can just drive there within about 45 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes. I wanted to be able to
Hmm.
get there. So like Atascocita, Humble, Spring, Conroe, Tomball, Woodlands, Richmond and like Katy, all those areas that are just kind of on the outside of the belt.
Yeah.
Those to me were just places that I just didn't really focus on, or I didn't want to focus on, because I didn't want to have to drive there every day. So then
Right.
that narrowed my focus really to just kind of this I-45 corridor. We have properties in Texas City, League City, Hitchcock and Houston, right off of, like, well, 45 and 610 in Houston, so it's kind of concentrated right there.
Hmm.
So I wouldn't
Yeah.
necessarily say it's all over the place, but you're right. We do have a flip in the Heights, of course, a market that we didn't know very well, and we're sitting on this property. All right. So,
Yeah.
like, again, didn't know the property very well, didn't know the street very well, and now we're sitting on a property that we can't sell. So if I stay in my lane and stay inside the loop south of I-10, which is where I really should be focusing, I probably would have just walked away from that deal.
Yeah.
I've just
Well,
been like, nah,
you didn't
I don't know.
know. I mean, that's also part of the pros of going out. It's because you didn't know. Like you're not going to, sometimes you're just not going to know until you just try out a new
Correct.
area
Yeah.
or a new
Yeah.
market. And, you may find that you like some areas better than other
But
areas.
I think too, like, one of the pros of going wide, going out further, is maybe the market that you're in is just expensive. you
Yeah.
know, Maybe you just live in an expensive market, where it's Austin or, California or something like that. Or maybe you live in Galveston, where there
Hmm.
are deals in Galveston, because there's a lot of people that are putting things on sale, like fire sales. But maybe you're just in an area that's saturated, right? So then it just
Hmm.
makes more sense to just go out, to like a
Right.
secondary or tertiary market.
Yeah. Or diversifying as far as strategy goes, as opposed to like short-term
Maybe not.
holds versus long-term holds. Or
Yep, exactly.
let's talk about vacation rentals for a second, because that's a little bit different animal. And you got some. So what are you tracking as far as that goes? And we really are interested in kind of hearing a little bit about what you think the future of the STR market
Yeah.
looks like, and especially in the
So
Houston area.
Yeah, so just disclaimer, our vacation rentals are in Galveston. So we don't have
Hmm.
anything in Houston, but my coach and many, many people in our mentorship program have vacation rentals in Houston. So just that little disclaimer. But what we track is we'll either do it quarterly or, like, in the middle of the year, semi-annual, is we'll track, our, like, average daily rate. So, like, what's our nightly rate compared to the year before? Just to
Hmm.
kind of get a sense of, okay, that gives me a sense, is the market going up? Is it getting better, or
Yeah.
is it getting worse? The vacation market. And between last year and this year, it's actually a little bit better. Between 2023 and 2024, it was definitely a lot lower. It wasn't as
Yeah.
great in Galveston, at least. All right.
Yeah.
Houston kind of leveled out a little bit too. Um, but with Houston, it's definitely more consistent income than,
Hmm.
like, Galveston, which is a seasonal, beach market.
Yeah.
You've got people that are going to be there March, April, May. I'm sorry, May, June, July. And then once school starts up, it just drops off, depending on your
Right.
location. I think we talked about that in one episode, depending on your location. Um, with Houston and Galveston, I love the fact that they have regulation. So we were talking about, like, where is this market headed? I think if
Hmm.
you're thinking about a market, number one, avoid HOAs. Okay, so don't buy a property that thinking that it's in an HOA. I love the neighborhood, I'm going to spin up an Airbnb. It's probably not going to be allowed, or if it is allowed, they then have the right to kind of take it out and not allow it.
Yeah.
So,
We've seen that. Yeah.
but we also
Especially the
look for
condos.
we also look for markets that have regulations in place. So Houston,
Hmm.
up until recently, didn't have any regulations on short-term rentals. It was just like the wild, wild west. People were just, like, putting a curtain between their living room and their dining room and renting it out. Like, it was just crazy. But I like markets that have regulations, because then it's like, cool. These are the rules that I know I need to follow, and I'm going to follow those rules. Better yet, those rules are designed to weed out all of these people that are doing things the wrong way, right? Get rid of all that trash. I don't want those people competing with me. I'm not really competing with them anyways. I'm only competing with the top 10% of the listings anyway, based on
Hmm.
my design and how I run the property, how I operate it, right?
Yeah.
So we didn't talk about it too much, but, like, figuring out, are you want to do this as a business or as a hobby? The
Hmm.
hobby investors, the hobby Airbnb operators, they're going to do okay. People that
Right.
run this as a true business, I think they're going to do great, especially if you're in a market like Houston that has diverse population, diverse
Hmm.
industries. You've got sporting events, you've got World Cup coming next year.
Yeah.
And now you have regulations that are designed to get a lot of this trash out of the market and really gonna pump up the demand for your
Yeah.
properties. So
That's
I
awesome.
think that's
Yeah,
where it's going in Houston.
that's good. That's a good way to look at it. So more stable, more long term. It's we got about 5 minutes left. Want to really open this up. If you're on the call, feel free to take yourself off mute or chat. We want to hear from you. So so we're talking about scaling, we're talking about growing, we're talking about strategies to building our portfolio. So go ahead and open it up. What questions do you have in regards of growing, scaling? What did you think we missed? What do we need to
Don't be
talk
shy.
about? Yeah, don't be shy. I may call someone else, but I really loved a lot of, we talked about the people, so being a good communicator, being intentional with the people you're talking to, tracking the conversations. Um, those are habits and activities. So nothing is left to memory. Everything's documented. You're writing notes down, learning quite a bit.
Right. And it's interesting, like we started this episode talking about your note taker, right?
Yeah,
Is now at least you have it, an electronic copy of that.
yeah,
Oh man, I remember that episode we talked about tracking whatever,
yeah.
you can go back. And that's what I do with my handwritten notes. And
Hmm.
that's like every property that I've talked to a homeowner on the phone with, I have it like I have that conversation, the highlights of that
Yeah.
conversation, either in the notebook or in my
Hmm.
notes I've taken out of old notebooks,
Yeah.
so um,
Um, and then like checklists, like you're building checklists on that. Like, what were some things that you ended up adding to your checklist later on that you didn't even think about in the beginning?
I think in the beginning, you mentioned insurance. Like the big thing for me was making sure insurance was taken care of. Your lender usually did that, but you want to underwrite that in the beginning, especially
Hmm.
if you're
Hmm.
investing in like a flood area or windstorm prone area. You want to underwrite that insurance cost in the beginning because
Right.
sometimes it may just be too expensive and it blows up your deal, right? The other
Yeah.
thing though is getting getting utilities turned on and getting utilities turned off. So
Yeah.
getting the proper utilities, right? If you have gas, don't worry about the gas until your plumber says go, right? That was
Yeah.
one thing that I learned with our second property. I got the gas meter turned on and the plumber hadn't done a pressure test yet.
Mm.
And Centerpoint wanted to take the meter away, you know, because
Yeah.
there was a gas leak in the house. So knowing that, and then when you sell a property, knowing when, don't forget, turn off the utilities because sometimes
Yeah.
those new homeowners will come in and they'll ride your electric bill for the next 3 months, you know?
Or we've had situations where we go to sell properties for investors and the investors turn their utilities off while we're under contract.
Oh, no.
Or if the rental becomes vacated, this happens all the time. It's a rental, they vacate, the owner decides to sell as opposed to leasing it out. We get inspector shows up, there's no power or there's no gas. That
Yeah.
yeah, so that kind of stuff can cost. That's a $500 cost that can easily be avoided by just thinking and
Yeah.
by just going through that
But those are some
checklist.
lessons learned, things that we put in our checklist, when we're going through the process and building our portfolio.
What does the future look like? We got 1 minute left. How far out are you going to go? Are you thinking are
Yeah.
you leaning towards focusing on one zip code?
Yeah, so I think for us, what we're doing right now is we're treating these new construction properties as flips. So we're taking the profits from these flips and paying down like business debt, closing out promissory notes, and just getting all that stuff off the books for the next year. 2024 wasn't very nice to us, so we're just kind of licking our wounds and then
Yeah.
closing those books out with these new construction properties. And then that fourplex, like the one I told you I saw on Saturday, it's in Third Ward. That's a zip code that we're
Yeah.
looking at. It is literally 5 minutes from U of H. You know, it's in the middle of everything. And so we're looking for small multifamilies, like two, threes, and fours that we can then renovate the heck out of with an awesome design using an architect and interior designer, and then operating those as furnished monthly rentals, you know. So
It's interesting, and we can probably close with this, but the last 2 years have been pretty difficult for in the real estate world for
mhm,
obvious reasons. But I can tell you, we work with a lot of people that are buying, flipping, holding, et cetera, and different asset types from commercial, residential, multifamily. And the guys in our circles that are winning are guys like you. They have found a way, no matter what is happening in the world, what's happening in the market. They're not a victim of the market. They find a way to stay in motion. They find a way to keep going and keep moving. We keep looking for the deals because the deals are out there. You're not making $120,000 on a flip like they do on, you know, HGTV or things like
right.
that, which is not realistic. But honestly, just staying in motion, keeping in contact with people, perfecting the system, and just knowing that the market's cyclical. We're at a down point in the market, and while a lot of people are getting out of the business right now, there's blood in the street, and that's the best time to buy, according to Warren Buffett.
Yeah,
So, any
yes, sir.
final words, Albert?
No, I just I think I tell this to newbies all the time. I mean, you just have to take action. You know, you just have to go out and do it. You know, looking at properties on the MLS on your computer is not action. You know, you're
Hmm.
just kind of thinking like you're taking action, but walking properties, making contacts, talking to contractors, getting your proof of funds, like all of those pre-steps up front. So whenever you're ready to make a move, you're
Yeah.
actually ready to make a move. You know, you're prepared. Hook up with a good mentor, a coach, partner with somebody. You meet those people by networking and getting yourself out there. Get from behind the computer and get yourself out there.
I'll be free all day today. I'm showing property in Galveston County, and then I'll be free again Wednesday afternoon. So if anybody wants to go look at some deals, call me, let me know. I'll run numbers for you. Albert, grateful for you, brother. Our friendship and our
Awesome.
relationship. Call if you
Awesome,
need,
bro.
and have a great rest of the day. Bye, guys.